Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Rainbow Thread. So last week, just a little bit of background, first of all. We had it originally set up back when people were, doing that crazy thing of gathering together in the same space with other people. We were doing a university series this month on A Rainbow Thread. Noam Sienna's really incredible new-ish book, where what he did was he went through 2,000 years of Jewish history and I apologize for mixing the metaphor here, resurrected all sorts of texts that we thought had been lost, and a sense of just sort of queer history within Jewish history and within the Jewish story and within this whole sort of Jewish mythology that we tell about ourselves and who we are and where we've come from. And really, he's gone through and given an incredible gift and resurrected just 2,000 years worth of texts. So anyhow, last week, because of sort of trying to find the silver lining in all of this, I had sent just a cold call. I guess you don't call it a cold call email, a cold email. I don't know what you call it. I sent an email to Noam, and he taught our class. So I'd really encourage you, if you weren't a part of it last week, to go and find the video. It's on, you can find it on CRC's Facebook videos, or if you don't have Facebook, talk to me and we can find it somewhere else for you. And he taught it. It was really great, really super interesting. Anyone have any takeaways from last week or anything they've been thinking about or anything to share or anything like that before we start to dig into some new texts? All right, so Shira Berkowitz is with us today, former advocacy director at CRC, and now works for Promo. Shira, would you start just by telling us a little bit about Promo also and the work that Promo does?
Sure. Promo is Missouri's LGBTQ equality organization. We do grassroots advocacy, policy, lobbying, organizing, and fieldwork all across the state to try to win non-discrimination protections. A little bit about Missouri: we, as a state, do not have comprehensive non-discrimination protections at all that protects people from sexual orientation or gender identity under law in the areas of employment, housing, and public services. And so Promo has been working for quite a few years, since we've been an organization since 1984, to try to win those protections at the state level. And we also do a lot of local work with the municipalities and inside corporations or healthcare. We do trainings, any kind of process we see to kind of all roads lead towards statewide non-discrimination protections.
So just a little bit of a plug that anyone who is looking for a place to put some, wow, Liz just showed up on a background of Liz. That was crazy.
I know. I don't know what that is. It's
but anyone who is looking, for an organization, an LGBTQ rights organization to dedicate either energy or certainly dollars they could use always I'd highly encourage you to check out Promo. They do incredible work, and really just the work Shira does is inspiring. So check it out. Okay, so today what we are going to do is we're going to continue on with a rainbow thread. The idea had been that we were going to pick over 5 Tuesdays in March. We divided the book 120 sources into fifths, so 24 sources in each fifth. And we were just going to do 24 sources each week, not the entirety of them, just sort of a few selections. So that's what we're doing this week. We're in the 4th fifth, and we are really getting into the modern era. So any comments, any thoughts before we dig into this week's texts? And feel free, I muted everyone, but if you want to say something, just unmute yourself. And also for those who are watching on Facebook, and it says we have 13 people watching on Facebook right now, if you go to centralreform.org, and click on community. Then you can click on the picture of a rainbow thread and join the Zoom conversation. Also at the top of the Facebook post itself, there should be a comment, or the description should have a link to the Zoom conversation if you'd like to join us. Okay, any thoughts before we jump in? Okay, let's do our first text. And sorry, I have the wrong thing pulled up, so this is going to get a little meta for a moment. Where are you? Here we go. Okay, so in article, this is just a heads up that this is one of those texts that is going to be a little beautiful and a little heartbreaking too, as many of these texts are. So this is an article from the Chicago Daily Tribune, and I think it'll tell its own story. Is there someone who will read for us?
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
I'll read.
Please.
Death reveals girl, wed girl to fight want. Husband got man's wage with mallet after industrial union, then pesticides came. 3 persons.
So just to note, that evidently is some way that they use to describe tuberculosis.
Oh, I see. Okay. 3 persons yesterday morning crowded the small bedroom in the rear of the 2nd floor of 2146 Ogden Avenue. They were Mr. and Mrs. Ben Rosenstein and Mrs. Rosenstein's mother. Ben Rosenstein was dying of tuberculosis at the age of 26.
Okay, so we start right with a heartbreaking beginning here.
Right. Pauline, I'm sorry. The effort brought coughs. Please bury me in my first black suit. You know, the young wife at the bedside buried her face in a pillow. The mother at the end of the bed prayed aloud in Hebrew. The dying victim continues between short labored breaths. We've been happy. I think I have done right. I wish it was true that dead men tell no tales. Doctor
Okay.
reveals.
So hold on, let's pause there. What do we see here? And please unmute yourself if you have a comment. I'd love to hear voices.
Well, I think the person who is on their deathbed has made peace with what is about to happen and feels comfortable with the kind of life that he's led by saying that he thinks that he's done right.
Okay.
But
go ahead.
But he says dead men tell no tales, so he says he wish it was true.
Yeah, right. Like there is some sort of ominous something coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the presentation of their relationship that we get here?
A normal married couple, young couple.
Yeah, young, tragic, loving, right? Doesn't this, I mean, like awful and tragic, but isn't there, I mean, it's sort of a loving, romantic, awful moment. Okay, let's keep going.
Doctor reveals grim joke. A few hours later, Ben Rosenstein died. The undertaker and the doctor revealed the grimness of the dying joke. Ben Rosenstein was a woman.
I don't get the joke.
Right. I think that probably speaks well to you.
It said it's a sick joke, and it's, you know, he withheld this information from everybody.
Yeah, right. That's all of a sudden the presentation of this story, which started so compassionately, has moved into presenting their relationship and Ben's reality as a joke and something to be laughed at and mocked. Okay, let's keep going. Liz, you want to keep reading or someone else, or
Either way.
go
Seven
for it?
years 7 years ago, Ida Weinstein landed at Ellis Island, a flaxen-haired, full-checked Jewish immigrant from Russian Poland. She brought with her to Pittsburgh the two children of her brother-in-law, Sam Cohen.
Remember
Sam-
him. He's going to show back up at the end of this story.
Sam had paid her passage. Ida Weinstein, at 19 years old, found that the wage for a girl supply worker in a cigar factory was not one that she could live on. In domestic service, she was handicapped by her inexperience, and the position did not coincide with her ideas of American liberty.
Okay, so let's take this apart for a second. First, what are we hearing about the way that wages worked at this point?
Women did not get paid the same wage that perhaps a male or a man would, although that was not the way it was presented when they probably, made the journey to America, coming in through Ellis Island.
Nice, right? Like this isn't a time when wage inequality was seen as something that needed to be fixed, or even at a time when it was something that wasn't talked about. It was a time where this was understood to be the way that the world should work, that men should get paid more for doing the same work as women, that's just the way that it should be.
I do think that there's something sort of empowering about this, though. They talk about her as having ideas, which seems kind of a little forward thinking to me, that she's seeking this independence and this and has ideas to their name, like, as opposed to the way that women were so commonly portrayed in this time, which is just sort of placeholders.
Totally.
I think if you look a couple of words before that, from what I'm gathering by the idea is wasn't her idea. It wasn't what she thought it was going to be of the American dream.
Right.
Yeah, but there's also, like, and I mean this in the good sense, not in the Israeli sense of chutzpah, that, like, I think there's something kind of, I love that last line here, right? It didn't coincide with her ideas of American liberty. Like, and so she was going to go do, or he was going to go do, we'll see by the end. And Noam says in his introduction, and he doesn't say this in a lot of these texts, but he says in his introduction that here he feels like masculine pronouns are the right pronouns, that this person chose these pronouns and lived their life under those pronouns. And normally he's not normally Noam is the he here, is not trying to take our contemporary categories and apply them to the past. In fact, overtly, he doesn't. He has in fact, last week when he was speaking, he had a really interesting piece about that. If you didn't listen, I'd recommend hearing that. Okay, let's keep going.
You want me to keep going?
Sure, take the text for us.
Okay. Where was I? She had been reading Marx and Tolstoy. At the Jewish shelter house in New York, she met Pauline Rosenstein, 19 years old, very frail and out of work. The girls roomed together to cut expense. In their hall bedroom one night, they worked out the new idea.
Okay, pause for a moment. First, I should have said this is 1915 when this article is coming out. And what do we see here? What's happening in this text? In this text being the newspaper article. How's the text trying to understand and categorize and explain the relationship?
Well, there's no other explanation for why they might live together than, oh, well, it's cheaper if you live together.
They were
Yep.
roommates.
They were roommates, just like us.
They were roommates.
They were roommates.
Right, and we're seeing that explanation throughout this. It's also kind of interesting that they're starting by talking about Marx too, right? Because when we talk about a Marxist explanation, we're talking about an economic explanation of something. And that's how they are categorizing both their relationship and Ben or Ida's sort of gender transition, they would probably use the word transgression here. Whatever words we're going to put here, right? Like they're explaining these things away as being fundamentally about economics, right? It couldn't be about someone's actual identity or about their actual love or relationship or so on and so forth. It must just be economics. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. Ergo, Ida should wait a minute. Did I miss it? And they're hot. Okay, they came. Okay. Ida, the strong one, could earn a better wage as a man than the two could as women. Ergo, Ida should be a man. They would get married, an industrial wedding, they called it. So they went to Cleveland and took a room as Mr. and Mrs. Ben Cohen. The girl husband had clipped her hair and dressed herself in a black suit of clothes.
So remember that black suit?
Oh, yeah.
Ben asked to be buried in it. Just hold on to that. It's going to be, I won't give it away. It's kind of tragic at the end.
She found factory work and was able to obtain a salary much higher than she had received as a woman. The work was harder, but then Ida told Pauline she was strong and by extra exertion could work right along with the men in the factory or the workshop. Bigger pay envelope. The extra exertion was forgotten in the joy of the bigger pay envelope. The girls were able to live in better quarters, eat better food, and go to the theater once a week.
Right. So, like, they went on dates, but that's not how this is being, right? Like, look at this.
All the joy is in the better money. There's no joy in their actual life.
Yeah.
Well, but with more money comes a better life because they're able to live in better quarters, eat better food, have some form of entertainment.
But the life is really what brings the joy, right?
But we're being emotional, and this is an article in a newspaper, so it's going to be fact-based and not feeling-based. So they're presenting all the facts as they know them.
Yeah.
I don't think they're presenting facts. I think they're presenting their concept of what it would be. I mean, the idea that someone would fundamentally change the way that they present just to earn a little bit more money seems unusual. You know, I mean, at least among my straight cisgender friends, I don't know any of them that would be willing to, you know, go by a different name, change their hair completely, the way they dress, and try to pass as the opposite gender just, you know, for
But
a few more
there's lots of stories of, you know, women dressing as men to go off and be in the Civil War and different war things. And I think, but it's significant how much more money they made. I mean, these are poor immigrant people who probably couldn't speak English when they came. They're at the bottom of the barrel, and the Marxism gave them a way to express their anger at the low wages of women, that they could have a real life by you know, changing gender. You know, I see that as a very real way to deal with the economic insecurity, not to mention, you know, the you know, the presenting as preferring to be a male.
You also don't need a wife to do that, though.
Yeah.
You could be caring for your frail sister, or you could just be an independent dude out living in the world. I think it says something that they presented themselves as a married couple.
Mm-hmm.
And that they spent so much time together, that they were clearly so bonded, you know. And what you mentioned about people historically having, you know, women passing as male for the Civil War, for instance, I think that's yet again another example of queerness being read through a cis-normative lens. So we assume that people aren't trans simply because they lived back then. Maybe that was just an excuse for them to be who they wanted to be.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not denying the trans part of it. I'm just looking at it from the Marxist economic reality. They could live a comfortable life as a happy couple
But let me
because
ask a quick
of the
question.
extra money a man can make over a woman. I mean, we're still making, if we're lucky, 70% of what a man makes. So
Yeah,
that
but
reality changed.
the other side of it is they couldn't have been a lesbian couple at this time and have made a salary as a couple. They wouldn't have been able to get married. So there, whether or not it was acceptable to be transgender or that was even a possibility, if they were just a butch lesbian couple, that wouldn't have worked in
But it
this
was-
society.
But it
That's
was
true too.
But it was a forced lesbian or trans situation. It wasn't out of love, or it was out of necessity.
So hold on. I want to contextualize a number of the conversations that are happening right now, because I think we're also having conversations at different sort of meta places within this text itself, right? One of the conversations we're having is about the connection to sort of income inequality, gender inequality, and Marxism, which is how the newspaper article author, I guess you call that person a journalist, is that the word? How the journalist is presenting that. There's another conversation that I think is happening, which is talking about how that was the only frame that someone could imagine from the heteronormative community during this time to articulate this relationship, right? And sort of taking that apart and investigating that. And then I think there's a third conversation happening looking at Ben or Ida and asking the questions of like, what was the nature of their actual relationship and not the nature of what the newspaper sensationalist article wants to use as an apologetic for the relationship. And I think there's pieces of all three conversations that are really important, but I just sort of wanted to categorize those. I think that might be helpful for us. Okay, let's keep going. We got more text here.
Do you want me to keep going?
Sure.
She found factory work and was able to obtain a salary much higher than she had received as a woman. The work was harder, but then Ida told Pauline she was, I did this one already, she was strong and by extra exertion could work right along with the men in the factory. Okay, the extra exertion was forgotten in the joy of the bigger paycheck, where I'm really lost here. The page is kind of bent.
Yeah, right there.
Pauline worked at such odd jobs. Pauline worked at such odd jobs as she could get. Ben Rosenstein and his wife never owed the room rent, and their credit was always good at the delicatessen. They always went out together in the morning. The girl husband donned overalls and swung a mallet in a furniture factory. She was in the packing department. Aside from a high-pitched voice, which the other workmen joked about, Ben Rosenstein was considered a good employee and a willing worker. In the course of time, they moved to Detroit. Again, in the packing department of a furniture factory, Ida found wages more satisfactory than those received by the women workers.
Right,
She
it's worth
was
noting
even
we're establishing a pattern, right? This isn't like a one-time, one place. It's not even like just at work that Ben goes by Ben. It's not just in one city, but actually they move to multiple places, and this is who they are and how they present themselves everywhere.
Did they change their name from Cohn to Rosenstein at this point?
I haven't followed the last names. I missed
Yeah,
that.
Rosenstein, Ben Rosenstein. That's when, because when initially they came as Mr. and Mrs. Cohen.
Yeah, they married
you're
as
right.
Cohen.
You're right. Interesting.
Because I was curious that at the opening scene, the Rosenstein parents were there at the bedside. So family.
Mother.
We'll return to that. You'll see.
Okay.
Okay, she was even able at times to leave Pauline at home and adventure into the smoke hazy pool rooms or behind the mystic screens of saloons.
Right, places where women weren't allowed to go.
Right.
I think that definitely speaks to Ben's queerness, whether Ben was a butch lesbian or was trans, you know, even when, you know, off of work, Ben's choosing to frequent areas that are more masculine coded.
Yeah. True.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, begins to lose weight. Then the industrial husband began to lose weight. She returned home at night exhausted and arose in the morning tired. She noticed that the fringe of cropped blonde hair was frequently damp on her forehead. She began to lag at her work. One night she came home with her arms aching and pains running through her back. Her face was damp with perspiration and her hands were cold. The next morning, the boss put another workman in the place of the absent Ben Rosenstein. The industrial husband had broken down under the burden of a man's work.
Okay,
She
hold on
lost-
for a second. I just, right, like, did someone else want to say it? I see
Oh,
also.
please. Like, you have tuberculosis. You didn't.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Like, okay, you're breaking under the weight of a man's work. You have tuberculosis. You're
But he didn't
actively dying.
But she didn't
Well, wait
know.
a minute, though.
Wait, she didn't know that she had
that
TB.
she didn't have. Yeah, I think that comes later.
Yes, but we do. We
At
have the
this
benefit
point-
of hindsight, and so do the authors of this piece.
Yeah, remember, this is an article in the newspaper, and this is how the newspaper is presenting what happens here. That Ben lost his job because in the end, he couldn't sustain, you know,
Because the gender binary is absolute, and anyone who tries to transgress those borders
I do
will
think that
and
was kind of
should
how
end up dying.
tuberculosis was understood in 1915, though, as a disease of exertion.
oh yeah, because it was, what was it called?
Consumption.
Consumption, yeah.
And they
Yeah.
actually thought that homosexual. I'm sorry.
No, go, please.
They used to think that people who were artists or homosexuals were more likely to get consumption because of their personality.
The emotional burden of it all.
Huh, interesting. So this is, huh. Okay. Okay, let's keep going.
She lost weight, a severe cold, and she found herself too weak to even search for a new job, much less fill it. Unable to make out on the woman's salary of Pauline, who was working in a hospital, the two young women invested, the remainder of their money in a railroad ticket and came to Chicago. For 3 or 4 years, the name of Ben Rosenstein had been carried on the books of the Jewish Aid Society.
This is highest, by the way. The Hebrew American immigrant, Hebrew, I don't know what it stands for. It's the Jewish Aid Society.
The charity investigators.
Hold on. Someone said it. Someone say it. Renee?
The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society.
Thank you.
There we go. The charity investigators reported that Ben Rosenstein had tuberculosis, that he was too weak to do any work, that he was in need of medical attention. Physicians from the society examined the patient, according to Pauline Rosenstein, and discovered the secret of her hidden, sex. They offered to place her in a sanitarium in the country where she might recover, but they insisted she would have to put in the woman's, she would have to be put into the woman's ward. The young woman would not consent.
Right. So we keep getting these markers that speak to what we would probably now call a trans man, right? Or to some sort of gender queerness here. that this is actually who Ben was, right? Like Ben doesn't want to go to the women's ward. Ben wants to be buried in a suit. Ben goes to the saloon. Ben, as Sarah pointed out, right? Like we have all of these markers over and over again of how Ben wanted to live his life.
In the meantime, Pauline's mother, who did not know until yesterday that her daughter's husband was not a man, was trying to get Pauline to separate from her husband. He is a sick man, my daughter, she said. He can't live long. You must get a divorce.
Sounds like a really, really wonderful, wonderful person, right? Encouraging her daughter to leave her partner because he's dying.
Right, and because she found out that
No, this is before. This is before that.
Oh, before, right?
She only finds that out later, or the day before he dies.
Right. But and at which point she says that he's a sick man. He can't live long. You must get a get.
No, before that, I think is what this is saying. That her mother was already trying to get her to leave him because he'd been sick for so long. Or you don't need a get. You don't need a get if he's dying. If he's going to die tomorrow, there's nothing useful in a get.
Gotcha. Okay. So a get is a ritualistic divorce under the Orthodox Hebrew Church, which is a childless wife must receive from her dying husband. But here it says it does, from her dying husband, if she wishes to marry again without the consent of her husband's brothers.
It's not quite right, but okay.
Okay. Ida Weinstein's first dress in 6 years will be a shroud. She will be buried tomorrow. Sam Cohen went out in the backyard last night and burned Ben Rosenstein's first black suit.
Right. I told you to be prepared for Sam to come back and for that suit to come back as awful, right? Like awful ending.
Lost the page.
Yeah, I turned it off. That's the end of the
Okay.
Actually, the text goes on from there, but this was, yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the burning of the suit because he had TB?
That wasn't my sense, but I hadn't thought about that. I read it as an act of transphobic hate. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Other thoughts on this text, whether on this ending or the text as a whole?
Well, I don't think initially, the decision to stay in, let's say, old time word, stay in the closet and be able to live as husband and wife and have a better life was not something that was so tragic, because it afforded them things that if they were to live, as let's say two girls, two women, two ladies, nobody would think twice. They could be roommates, they could be sisters, they could be whatever, but they wouldn't be able to make enough money individually. So the idea to become, is it really that initially that they were, that Ben was transgender, or was it because they were trying to figure out a way to reach the American dream, so to speak?
So the second answer is certainly how the newspaper reporter wants to understand this, right? And Noam both beautifully last week and in the introduction to this text says, like, look, there are all sorts of markers that you can understand this as a relationship, a butch femme relationship, or you can understand Ben as a trans man. And at some level, and I thought this was really nice, Noam said it so much better last week than I am going to here, but that, like, there's enough room in these texts for all sorts of us to see ourselves in these texts too. And for all sorts of people to see themselves in these texts. And it doesn't have to fall into one category or another of our contemporary ways of dividing up the world, because God knows 100 years from now, people will divide up the world differently than we do today too. Other thoughts on this text?
I think it's heartbreaking that Ben's queerness is what results in his death. you know, if Ben hadn't been queer and had been able to receive medical treatment, felt comfortable, felt safe, been able to, you know, keep his relationship with his wife, you know, whether it was because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to stay married to her, or if it was because, you know, they used to lobotomize people back then for, you know, being queer or trans, or, you know, all these different things. It's just heartbreaking that he could have lived longer.
If he was willing to not be true to himself.
Yeah.
Nice, thanks for pointing that out. Other thoughts on this text?
I'm not sure how it could be any more tragic.
Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, also, at least for me, also, I think beautiful. Like the relationship that is presented about the two of them is also just beautiful. They love each other so much. That's so clear. Okay, any last thoughts before we go to our next text?
I think that there's a, you know, there's a seeming cluelessness on the part of the journalist who's writing this.
Totally.
And you get the sense of, you know, this tragic couple and how isolated they felt. And I got a sense, you know, they moved cities twice and they moved long distances. And people lived so much more closely together in apartment buildings. They shared bathrooms at the end of a hallway. I even had this sense of maybe they felt they had to move in order to preserve their love and their relationship. They were afraid of perhaps discovery. I think that the journalist for all, and I don't know who's writing his or her failure to grasp, is also trying to be as, you know, I think he wants to see them in something of a sympathetic light. Right at the beginning where it said that, you know, they're reading Marx and Tolstoy, I think he earmarked, he said, okay, these are poor immigrants, but they seek out culture, you know, they're respectable women. And an effort to understand it in a way that he's just not prepared to look beyond that economic explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I think
go ahead.
I was going to say, we had mentioned about friendship. I thought it was interesting that on page 227, they mentioned that Ben was known as Little Benny to their friends. So, I mean.
Oh, that's on a page that we didn't look at. Sorry, I was about to share.
Yeah, it's 227, but I just thought that was interesting that it did mention like they did have some people, and then later in the story, one of the doctors at the Jewish Aid Society knew that Ben was born a woman and did not expose her. So I thought that was interesting that, you know, they did have allies and friends, even in this really, you know, kind of scary time to be gay.
Yeah.
I had wondered whether he refused medical treatment so that he would not be found out.
Well, he'd already, like the person who was saying that already understood the dynamics going on here and had told him that he would have to go to the women's medical facility, and he said no, right? I mean,
I think didn't want the medical treatment because he didn't want to have to be on the woman's ward. But the fact is that the treatment really doesn't matter one way or the other. People died from TB up through the 1940s. They put them in sanitariums and let them die.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people die of tuberculosis therapy today.
Yeah. So there was no treatment whatsoever. There was really nothing you could do.
Yeah.
So could it be that if he had not taken the position of a male and worked in that environment, would he have been at less risk of contracting?
Well, Polly worked in the hospital, so it's quite likely that she was an asymptomatic carrier.
Yeah, that's true.
And you imagine that they're living in tenement kind of housing where you're going to have, right? TB comes from close quarters. That's how TB spreads. Yeah.
And smoky billiard halls.
Okay, let's do another text, shall we?
Wait, one last thing. That's 1915. you can almost look at it today as 2020.
And
with
where
what's
are
going
we?
on. Still haven't learned. If TB was the plague back then, look what we have today.
Yeah.
And, with everybody.
Okay. So this next, oh, you know what? We're gonna jump ahead because there's a text in here that I want to make sure we don't miss. That's kind of incredible. Where are we? And then we'll go backwards. Okay, we'll continue of a theme. This is from 1933. So as a little bit of background before we jump into this text, I think it was 1933, 1936. Hold on, I'll tell you. When are the Olympics in Berlin? Does anyone remember? Is that 32?
1936.
This is 36 then, when this text is. So in 1936, evidently there were a number of articles that were running in American newspapers about these women athletes who were going off to the Olympics and coming back as men. Right, they were gender transitioning and coming back. And so this is a really incredibly remarkable article in Yiddish in the Daily Forward, which is still a newspaper today, in which someone writes in, a man writes in and says, "Ugh, you think this is new? Let me tell you a story about the shtetl back in the 1870s." You'll see this one, the other one we called tragic. There's nothing tragic about this one. This is beautiful. Okay, someone want to read for us?
Is this on page 290?
This is on page 291 if you've got the book in front of you.
Okay. At the age of 23, the girl became a boy. Peter tells an interesting event from their shtetl in Ukraine. We're the editor of the Forward. Not long ago, I read a story in the Forward that took place in America about how a girl became, but that's not news to the people in the town where I'm from. Permit me to tell the story in your paper.
Right, hold on. Isn't that a great start? Right, like get over yourself if you think this is new. In some ways, this could be the theme of this whole book, right? Like get over yourself that you think this is new. Okay, keep going.
In our shtetl of Krivitzer, Ukraine, everyone knew Bela, the girl who sold herring, geese, and other foodstuffs. She was a tall redhead and sturdily built. She also spoke with a deep bass voice and walked about with hard and heavy steps. The way she carried herself always brought forth an uncertain feeling, something like she's not quite a woman, but also not quite a man. When she was still a child, her father would often take her to see the Tolner Rebbe, Rabbi Dovil, hush up, Patsy, and sometimes to the Sadhguru Rebbe to ask for help. The only answer he ever got was, "God will help, God will help." The father would return home anguished and unhappy.
Okay, so what's the setup right now? What is this person's childhood like?
Well, they can already tell that she's not quite female or male.
Okay.
I love how it almost seems like their dad is quite supportive, wants Beryl to feel comfortable. I don't know whether it was more of a, help Beryl to feel more like a woman or, encouraging Beryl to be identified as a man, but you can tell that the dad wants to help.
Wants to do something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Sarah said Beryl. You'll see the giveaway there in a moment. We'll keep it with Bela for now, but yeah, it was very respectful of you. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
In the meantime, the years flew by and Bela grew too until she reached the age of 23. One fine morning, Bela left for Odessa, where she was introduced to an important professor. She spent a long time under his care, under which Bela eventually became a man.
Okay, we don't know what sort of professor this was or what sort of what this involves, whether we're talking about surgical treatments or whether we're talking about psychology, or we know that this is the era when those things are starting to emerge at the borders of things that we might call medicine and might call science and might call psychology today. So we don't understand exactly what this means, but something.
Okay. The story was well known and was in all the papers. All Russia talked of it. In the
Okay, so that's less than nice, right? Like,
I would think so. In the shtetl, we waited impatiently for her return, and on the day when Bela was to arrive, half the shtetl ran to the bridge to greet her, or better said, to greet him. And she wasn't called Bela anymore. Now she was Beryl. And when we saw her, it was as if we were stunned. Before our eyes was a handsome, healthy, red-headed man. Anyone who didn't know Bela previously wouldn't have known that he had been a girl.
okay, pause. Like,
Wow.
this is an amazing paragraph.
Yeah.
So, someone want to take this apart, say something about it?
Well, I think the people of the shtetl, even though at the times, were accepting of in some, I don't know, maybe they were curious as to what she looked like when she came back, or if it was a matter of accepting, regardless whether she was a woman or he became a man.
Right?
Because
Yeah,
these
like,
people knew her from when she was a child. He was a child, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that where he grew up
Yep.
It sounds to me
initially?
like they're saying like, well, we don't entirely understand, but we love you and we're glad you're here and you're healthy.
And we'll call you by whatever name you want, whatever pronouns you want.
Yeah.
They were accepting.
Right? Like in 1880s shtetl.
Mhm.
I think there was a recognition that just by seeing Beryl as a healthy and handsome and someone comfortable with that identity, whereas before Bela was clearly not. Was an individual who was perceived to be uncomfortable.
Right, and
I
kind of
don't
off.
see that in the writing.
Well, one thing
like,
you said was, you said, healthy and handsome, but they also saw him as a man. And this reminds me of the text that we read last week, in which there was a person that kind of went away and came back and was a man and fully accepted and everything. But how would they have been perceived if they had come back as a woman? I think the story would be a lot different.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the paragraph that starts in our shtetl,
Yep.
it doesn't say that she was uncomfortable. It brought forth an uncertain feeling, something like she's not quite a woman, but also not quite a man. So the people in the shtetl were not quite comfortable with her.
Interesting. That's a really interesting.
And the other thing, I don't see her father as being a supportive person at all. He's anguished and unhappy. He's not accepting of whoever she was before she went away.
Yeah, there's certainly a read of her father that like her father's or his father's trying to help him. There's also a read here that like he's trying to help by sending Beryl Bela to conversion therapy or something.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. From then on in the shtetl, she was called Beryl Bela. With the help of the professor, the government freed him from military service. Beryl Bela soon learned to daven and was in synagogue every day. Later on, he got married to an old girlfriend, Black Rachel, who was a nice girl. In our shtetl, Beryl Bela also always had a good name as a fine, upstanding Jew.
Right, like look at this. Beryl comes back to the community that he was born in, going by Bela and going by female pronouns originally, and comes back with new pronouns, a new name, and they're like, great, let's teach you how to daven and you can lead the services. And and these are things that would only be open and available to men.
This is amazing.
Right? Like it's amazing. And they happily, like there's presumably a rabbi who stands up and marries Black Rachel to Beryl. And like Mazel Tov, and everyone celebrates at the chuppah. Like it's amazing. I think this is a treasure of a text.
What is a daven?
What'd you say?
What is a daven? Soon
Daven. daven means to lead to pray, to lead the services, to be the, in a Reform context, it's usually the rabbi who leads services. But if you go into an Orthodox shul or even a conservative shul, like it's a rotation of people who just get up and lead the davening.
All right.
But it is definitely considered like you need to be a more macher kind of person, like a bigger deal to be asked to lead the davening. So we're getting that from this too, right? Like that Beryl was a macher in the community and was accepted and was a leader and like maybe was the synagogue president and like, okay, any last thoughts on this text before we move on to another one?
Just,
I'm curious.
I'm
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead there.
I was going to say, I'm curious about the phrase here, "an old girlfriend," for Rachel.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So,
I don't know what to make of that. You have thoughts?
It could mean something, or it could just be a whole lot of people call all of your female friends girlfriends.
Yeah.
My female friends girlfriends, and I'd tell her like, don't say that, Mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hate that. But it could mean something and could not mean something.
Yeah.
It gives me a sense that even when they were young, that they understood that they had a special bond between them.
Nice.
I certainly like to read it like that. I think that's quite sweet.
Yeah, totally.
I preferred in this case to read it that way.
Also, I think it might be important to call out the fact that he was seemingly passing very easily by everyone, and that certainly conferred a degree of privilege for him.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question about the davening.
Yep.
So when it says he soon learned to daven, does that just mean pray, or does it mean lead the prayer?
We're probably talking about leading the prayers here.
Okay.
We're talking about being the shaliach tzibur in a traditional context. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that imply that as a man, then he was entitled to learn to read and to pray, which would not have been given to him when he was a she?
Yeah.
Well, Jewish women during this time would have had a higher than average literacy rate, if that's what we're talking about. But
they couldn't have led the prayers at the synagogue, could they?
But they absolutely could not have led the prayers. But even and that's why at some level, like I think it means leading the prayers, but even if it doesn't mean leading the prayers, it still says something really powerful, because women wouldn't have even been welcome or been counted in the minyan at the synagogue.
Right.
If they were even allowed in him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there was like a back wall with a thing and you could look through a little slot, kind of whatever. Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Becky.
I wonder how old this guy is that's telling the story and how much he's adding to it.
Yeah, don't you want to know about the person who wrote this letter to the forward, right?
Well, I mean, he said everybody in Russia was talking about it. I highly doubt that.
Everyone he talked to in Russia. Like,
yeah.
My question is why, even though they accepted him upon his return, did they not allow him to get rid of his female name? Why did he
this
become
hyphenated
Beryl
name?
Bailey instead of just Beryl?
Yeah.
Why was he not allowed to drop the feminine?
Interesting. Yeah, it's a nice observation.
I would
like we accept you, but we still know that you're kind of not like everybody.
I hadn't honed in on that before. Nice reading. Someone was about to say something.
Marion? It was Marion. I'd like to know a little bit more about Black Rachel, who was such a nice girl.
I assume
it did raise some of my, it's a lovely story, but that raised a little hackle.
Why?
Couldn't we have a little bit more about this woman, Black Rachel, and her story? But no, she was just a nice girl.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit.
Yep.
And does the color what black Rachel, green Rachel,
So
orange Rachel? I mean,
I think what this refers to, I could be totally wrong, and if someone knows this better than me, I could be totally wrong on this, but I think that is referring to Rachel's hair.
I concur.
And this was not
Okay.
an uncommon sort of marker that you would find during this time. There are a whole set of stories of the Schwarzer Wolf. Does anyone know those? Like the Schwarzer Wolf.
Wolf? A black wolf?
Yeah. And today, by the way, that's a word that like is maybe that close to the N word in Yiddish, by the way.
Right.
But it just means
But it
black.
also still just means black.
But it also just still means black, and
Right.
that is how it's being used in those stories. It's referring to like someone with jet black hair.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I think
So it didn't have anything to do with her ethnic, like her background, whether she was African American or any of those things.
No.
Nice
Yeah,
girl.
we're talking
It was
about
just the color of her hair.
We're talking about the shtetl in 1880s.
Right.
Kiev or
There
wherever.
aren't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go to a new text. Was that the last one on this section? Yeah. Okay. What time is it? I want to respect. We go until 8:30. We have a little more time. Great. Okay. We're jumping around a little bit. So this is on page 280. Is this the intro? There's more on the next page. Yeah. Okay. So this is in. I'm sorry. I should have included the parts with the dates. I got lazy this week. This is 1934. So this is a little bit of history here. Tel Aviv is started as a Jewish city. It's a brand new city. It started in 19. Does anyone know the year?
No.
By the way, just as a reminder, I'm going through for some people as I hear microphone noise and I'm muting you. You should totally feel free to unmute yourself whenever it is that you want to say something. Don't take anything by my muting other than I'm just going around in a circle to keep it quietish for everyone else. So I don't remember exactly when. Early 1900s, Tel Aviv is started. If someone wants to Google that and let us all know, that'd be great. But Tel Aviv is right next to Yaffo, which is an Arab city, and that's going to be important here for how this is going to be described in a moment. One of the old tropes of sort of Orientalism, and I'm using that word very particularly and kind of how Said would use it, right? Orientalism is this way of looking at the East as being this thing, right? And Edward Said has a really, in fact, I think his book is called Orientalism.
1909, Daniel.
1909 is when Tel Aviv started. Thank you.
Yeah, April 11th.
So if you go back to this time period and imagine how like Western Europe was thinking about the Middle East and Asia and the Orient, right? This area that they were controlling and colonizing, or had controlled and colonized. There was and continues to be, I think, a sexualization of these places and of these peoples as well. Think about how, for instance, Chinese women are often presented in the United States as opposed to Chinese men, for instance. Right, we still have all sorts of pieces of this legacy. But one in particular that I was not at all familiar with is there was an understanding that queerness was a part of Arab communities and could almost be caught by spending too much time in Arab cultures. Right, and it was often used as a sign of sort of the classic British sort of European hierarchy. I guess not just British, you certainly find it in Germany and throughout Europe, the hierarchy of the races or of the cultures or of the, however you want to say it, civilizations, right? And so it was understood that and they always refer to it in these texts as the homosexuality or the invert. That's the other word that you find here. That this was a result of the Arab influence and couldn't be something that was natively Jewish. So we'll see some of that here. So there are these, well, I think we can jump into this text. So this is in pre-Israel mandate Palestine. Britain is controlling this. Tel Aviv is a Jewish and Zionist city, meaning a city that the people there are mostly trying to work to create a Jewish state, but it is also a sort of hotbed of liberalism and socialism and arts and so on and so forth. Okay, let's read this.
Is there a meaning for Tel Aviv? Where's the origin of that name?
Yeah, so it's a translation of Herzl's book Alt Neuland, the Old New World, or the Old New Land, which was a book about Zionism, Theodor Herzl. And so Tel Aviv, a tel is like a layer in archaeological tel, or like the layers in archaeology that speak to a certain time period. And Aviv means spring in Hebrew. So it's the old, Aviv means spring. Spring, like the season, spring.
Okay.
Not like water. So Tel Aviv is a sort of translation at some level of Alt Neuland, the Herzl book, The Old New World. Okay. Someone want to read this?
In almost all the cities of Europe, there are these sorts of establishments called clubs, as it were. The meaning of the initial ABC is, I can't
Anyone
read.
speak German?
Liz?
Allgemeiner Busseranten Club, which translate as the General Buggers Club. Right, so we're dealing with old derogatory terms, particularly for gay men. But I also like, there's something about the ABC that like very clearly speaks to a code too, that the people who would know, and the people who wouldn't know, wouldn't know. Okay, keep going.
Namely, a general establishment for homosexuals. I can't read that next word. Masculine men and feminine men met each other in these clubs and hold orgies.
Okay, right, and this is one of the sort of classic homophobic presentations of, in particular, gay male relationships, that there is almost definitionally a dynamic that one must be the man and the other is the woman in the relationship, right? Like you still find this really homophobic trope over and over again. Oh, I should have said, this is a newspaper article in a newspaper that runs like sensationalist news. So this is like the gossip column in the sensationalist, what do we call those paper? Yellow paper? What, I forget the phrase, but yeah.
The Star.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Infotainment has always been with us. Okay, let's keep going.
In the East, these types are more common, and it is well known that in our country, you don't have to go hunting for them with candles.
Okay, pause for a second. So first of all, I just want to point out that Tel Aviv continues to have a reputation as being a very queer-friendly city. I think it's also worth saying that is less and less true every year, unfortunately. Israel is becoming a more regressive place year by year on almost all issues, including gender equity and queer rights and almost any of these, unfortunately. But the Tel Aviv at some level has always had this reputation. Okay.
You want to explain hunting with candles?
Yeah, like it's not so hard to go finding a gay bar in Tel Aviv, is what they're saying, right? You don't have to go like peering with a microscope around every corner. That if you want to find a gay bar in Tel Aviv, you can find a gay bar in Tel Aviv.
Okay, it's enough to take a short trip down the alleys of Jaffa, and the cafes there. And whoever has open enough eyes will see the rascals making out lustily in front of all passerbys.
Okay, do we see, right? Yafo is the Arab city, and in the East, these types are more common. I just want to sort of pull out the racist Orientalism here too. The racist homophobic Orientalism, I guess it all goes together, which it often all goes together. Okay, let's keep going.
These pairs are not satisfied only with Yafo, but they want to have enjoyable outings as well. and to that end they come to Tel Aviv. Apparently, even in the Hebrew city, or more accurately in its suburbs, there are residents who have this diseased orientation. Indeed, because of them, a kind of ABC has been established here, an establishment for meetings, and intentionally in the center of the city, in one of the well-known cafes. There, in the deep dimness that prevails in a sort of side room, these men gather to enjoy themselves. Is this more? Around the tables, they all sit in pairs, drinking and eating. From time to time, someone puts on the pathaphone, the record player, and men embrace each other and go to dance. These dances are lustful, arousing the inclination of the dancers and stirring up disgust in whoever looks on from the side. In the late hours of the night, the pairs begin to disperse. Trolley after trolley goes by, dispersing the pairs and scattering them to all corners of the first Hebrew city. The rest of the text disappeared.
Yeah, that was the end of it.
I want to know how he knows all this.
Well, he's the gossip. Yeah, that's a good question, Becky. But first of all, as awful as some of these lines in here are, I love this notion that it ends with here, right? Like, what is one of the distinctive qualities of the first Hebrew city? How gay friendly it is. Even if this article's not so wonderful at times. Sensationalist, but okay, let's open this up. Thoughts?
I think it's interesting how in these second two paragraphs, we see what you mentioned before, which is the Orientalization of homosexuality here. It's very other. It can't come from Tel Aviv. It's definitely coming from Yafo. Even though all these people live in the suburbs and this place has been put together for folks in Tel Aviv, it's definitely not from around here.
Totally.
I also love how sweet it is. There's all this scandal, but what are they doing? They're going on dates and they're dancing. That's really adorable,
Yep.
Just having a nice time out.
Totally. By the way, it's just worth noting that today, Yafo is the trendy area. Like, that's where you want to live, is Yafo, particularly if you're sort of young and single. Okay, other thoughts, other reactions to this text?
Is this area still today known for gay and lesbian people, like, to gather, or has that shifted?
My understanding, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is actually that Tel Aviv has historically been much more of sort of the queer capital of Israel. Again, these things are changing, but like particularly in the 90s, Israel and Tel Aviv in particular were much more LGBTQ friendly than the United States. I don't think that's true anymore. I think we probably swapped, unfortunately. Fortunately, I don't know how you do, but yeah. Other thoughts? Okay, let's look at another text. Let's see what we've got. That one we read. Okay, this one I thought was really interesting. I'm going to give a little context first. This is a text written by, I don't know how to say that name, Mordechai Langer. I'm not sure what that middle name exactly would be pronounced as, so I apologize, Mordechai. What is distinct about Mordechai is that he's one of the first people to take sort of homosexuality, that's certainly the word he used, and Judaism both seriously as identities in relationship with each other, right? We certainly have examples of people that we've looked at texts that we want to put them in contemporary categories, but what's happening here with Mordechai Langer is that his categories are getting much closer to contemporary categories that we will recognize. And in particular, he has a self-awareness about these as identities, as Jewish identity and as gay identity, in a very academic sense. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really kind of distinctive about him and his writing here. So this is a piece of writing that I think if you didn't know that about him, you would read this text and think, oh, maybe it's a wink and a nod, maybe not. But once you know this about him and you see all of his other works, it's clear that this is extremely intentional, as we'll see in a moment. That we are supposed to be reading into it in the ways that we will be reading into it, and that's what he intended with this text. So this is set in the yeshiva. So we've looked at a number of these texts throughout Jewish history, by the way, which I think is really interesting because it's so different than how maybe we would conceive of the yeshiva today, where yeshivot tend to be, at least in the traditional world, places only for men, and where we would assume that two men engaged in a sexual relationship would be like banned immediately and the most awful of results, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that we have seen, and that really I didn't understand, though it's almost just like self-evident once you start thinking about it, and that Noam really brings out, is this sort of idea that the yeshiva has always been a home for gay men. Which, like, duh, as we'll see here. But will someone go ahead and read this for us? Someone new?
I'll give it a shot.
Go for it. And we're starting with to understand.
To understand what kind of love dwelled between the yeshivim, one only has to step into the Beis HaMidrash.
Okay, yeah, let me translate some of these words. We've got so a yeshiva is the name of one of these places of study, again, for primarily men. In fact, during this time would have been probably exclusively men. So yeshiva, it's related to the word yoshev, which means to reside, to sit. So yoshvim are the ones who reside at the yeshiva. So when the yoshvim here are the men studying there, living there, engaging in Gemara, so on and so forth. And Beis HaMidrash is it's the place where everyone goes and they study together. It's the study hall. I guess that's
Does
the
it
word.
mean the house of Midrash?
Yes, but Midrash here is not like the technical meaning that we think of with Midrash. It's the broader sense that Midrash is deriving it from, meaning like the house of study and engaging with text. Yep.
Okay. Where they are enveloped with their studies. Here sit two young men with beards just beginning to cover their chins, studying assiduously over thick Talmud folios. The one holds the other by his beard, looks deep into his eyes, and in this manner explains a complicated Talmud passage. And there, two friends pace around the hall, deep in conversation while embracing one another. During meals, one can see that they always dine out of the same bowl. In the dark corner stand a pair. The younger of the two rests his back against the wall. The elder has the entire frontal part of his body literally pressed against him. They look lovingly in each other's eyes, but keep still. What could be playing out within their pure souls? They themselves do not even know. The boy's soul, suddenly taken by an inexplicable yearning, here it's alternatively translated lust, for the rabbi finds no peace at home.
So just pause for a moment. The word rabbi here, while it means rabbi, is primarily, as far as I understand it, a marker of age, in a distinction in age relationship. I think that's what we're dealing with here, because in a yeshiva, basically all of the teachers would be rabbis.
So is it like his older teacher, his older peer, someone a few tiers up maybe?
Yeah, that's a fair way of thinking about it. We're also probably playing into, I don't know if you call it a trope, or because you find this way across cultures, a and we've seen lots and lots of texts, particularly more in antiquity, where homosexual relationships between older men and particularly students, younger boy students, is just like an established way that things are done. It was a normal part of much of life in the Arab Jewish world, 1,200 years ago, as Noam points out. But you find this across cultures, right? And today we might often articulate this as abusive relationships too. That's worth pointing out here. But you find this in Tibetan monasteries. You find this in the Catholic Church, right? Like in deeply abusive ways often today. But if you go back 1,000 years ago, you also find it in the Catholic Church as a much more normal kind of thing. Okay.
All right. Burton finds no peace at home, not only in his nightly dreams, but also, and this is for the Hasidim a sign of grace. While awake, the shining form of the rabbi appears before his eyes. Finally, he decides. He leaves a comfortable home, often against his father's will and his mother's tears, and travels to the city of the rabbi in order to cleave. The alternative translation here is to nestle up to him, to be dovek forever. As soon as he arrives and it is determined he is serious, he is greeted with open arms by the Shivri?
Chevra.
Chevra.
So this is the same word as chaverim, like friends, but a chevra is the like sacred community of people who are learning together.
Okay. Soon he finds himself in the middle of a circle of friends who draw near to him through various tendernesses, and it doesn't take long to find an older student who has the same soul to study with, which he accepts with great joy. How blessed he feels.
Okay. I love this. This is like just a beautiful, unapologetic moment, right? Thoughts on this text?
So I'm a grad student at the University of Birmingham in England, and I'm a distance student. And part of what I'm studying is gender studies and biblical studies in the Hebrew Bible. And what I see in a lot of, like you were saying, antiquity is that homoeroticism is often kind of seen as the most distilled version of spirituality or holiness as a way of connecting with divine masculine presence, So it's a very spiritual experience, this love. It's, not just, perhaps homosexual as we would think it, but also in this very emotional, spiritual level, you've got this really intense bond.
Nice. And there's I almost included the text. There's a great text in here from one of the Zionist youth groups, Shomer Tzayir or something, one of the early Zionist youth groups, where there's like this letter of discussions about between two older members who used to be in it and now they're like old. So they're not in the youth group, and they're writing each other saying, what can we do to increase the homoeroticism in today's youth? Because there's not enough homoeroticism. They're only talking about men, by the way.
Always.
Yeah, right. Like, but there's not enough homoeroticism, and we understand that nothing builds camaraderie amongst men like homoeroticism. So going on very much with what you said. Yeah. Other thoughts on this text? Other reactions?
So is it like a known fact that there were a lot of homosexual relationships in the yeshiva?
Yes.
And is that true? And are the Orthodox leaders just ignoring that? I mean, it doesn't quite jive with their teachings, does it?
So one thing to remember is that Orthodoxy is newer than Reform. And Orthodoxy is invested in it's an ahistorical notion that the past is fundamentally the same as their present, or similar to their present. But the reality is that this is not true. So first of all, I bet that there is deep truth to this in today's ultra-Orthodox yeshivas too. I bet this is true there as well. But I mean, in this book, and it's been one of the things that stood out in every single period, and we've been going through this chronologically. Today we were a little like mixed in our era, but generally each week we've been going through it chronologically, is that in every era that we've looked at in the last 2,000 years, the yeshiva has been a place where men have sex with men.
You're blowing my mind.
Are we to assume that these relationships play out physically? Or is it some kind of, don't everybody make fun of me? Or is it some kind of platonic, constantly frustrated love ideal thing going on?
So like that's one of the questions, particularly with a lot of the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages. I guess we don't call it Middle Ages when we're talking the golden age of Muslim Spain. But like in Muslim Spain, we have lots of those texts, and that's always been one of the questions: is this referring to sort of homoeroticism as a genre, or is this referring to actually how people were living? But no, I mean, like there are certainly stories that it's not clear in, but let me tell you, there are all sorts of stories where it's not like you have to read in between the lines. There was some story we looked at from, I don't remember when, it was maybe the time of one of the Crusades, about two men who there's a riot that happens at the synagogue because they're caught having sex on Yom Kippur. But the text itself, what's amazing about this text is like the riot doesn't seem to have anything to do with the fact that it's two men having sex, and everything to do with like they come from different sides of the tracks and they should not be together because one guy's from this family and the other's from that family, and we know that those families shouldn't mix, and like it's like a Romeo and Juliet kind of situation. So yeah, I mean we have all sorts of evidence of that, and that in its most profound of senses is what Noam being the author of this, right? Or the collector, the editor, I don't know what you call it, compiler. That's in its pure sense, I think what Noam is trying to do and has done with this collection is to show that though the categories of identity that we have today didn't exist in the past, all of the types of human beings and human urges and human expressions of sexuality and human expressions of gender that we have today have always existed. And every way that a Jew expresses themselves today, Jews have expressed themselves throughout Jewish history.
Yeshivas, are they just in orthodoxy? In other words, Orthodox generally? And then the second part of that question is, who really goes to yeshivas? What is the purpose that they're going to the yeshiva? I just need some clarification on what.
Totally. So today we associate yeshivas with the Orthodox world, though it's worth noting that there's all sorts of really interesting contemporary places that are going by the phrase yeshiva today too. Like Hadar in New York, if anyone's familiar with that community, or Pardes in Jerusalem. Does Hartman ever call itself a yeshiva? No, but there's all sorts of places that are more liberal in their outlook and in their approach and are not Orthodox that are going by this word now, but that at some levels a reclamation. But prior to the invention of Orthodoxy, I don't know, 200 years ago, then yeshiva was just where you went to study Talmud, and where, in particular, men went to study Talmud, right? Because that wasn't open to women.
Were they going there to, I understand that part, but were they going there just to study it for studying's sake, or?
I think boarding school.
Pardon?
I think boarding school.
Okay, boarding school, all right. That helps clarify some stuff here then.
Yeah, right, and also, by the way, boarding schools have also long had associations of homoeroticism.
Yeah.
In the military, and like all of these places where traditionally men gather with men. Okay, other thoughts, other comments here, or on anything? This will be our last text for today.
I had one thought, and that was someone mentioned, okay, is there actual physical activity going on, or is this just kind of like a tension? To me, it seemed like there is fairly clearly, there's a lot of physical action going on just in the text alone, much less what's going on between or behind closed doors. My question is more, is there emotional action going on? to match, and to what extent, etc.?
Yeah, we didn't get it as much here, though. We skipped one of the texts that I had pulled out, which is a poem, which, where is it? Oh, I'm like scrolling, but I'm not sharing my screen. Like that would be useful to you all. Anyways, I'd encourage you to get this book or look through it or get it from a library or make your library buy it or whatever, because there's all sorts of really beautiful, beautiful, beautiful expressions of like deep emotional love. In particular, going back like 2,000 years before this, we looked at it in the first session. There's Reish Lakish and Rabbi, forgetting who it was. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Joshua. I don't remember. I'm totally blanking. Who is it?
Yochanan. It was Yochanan.
They have this, like, it seems pretty clear that there is a physical sexual relationship also, probably, but whatever about that, because their emotional love and commitment to each other as expressed in the text is as intense as any love you'll ever read about. I forget what text number it is if anyone has their book and sees it.
It's number 13.
Thank you. And what will you give us the reference for that? Because anyone can go look that up in the Talmud too. That's just part of the Talmud.
Yes, let's see. It says, where is it? It's not giving me the, is it? Hold on. This is sources 48, 52, no. I mean, I read it in Daf Yomi and I totally forgot where. Yeah, I don't know. It says on here, number 13, the robber and the rabbi, Rabbi Yohan and Rish.
It's
Bava Metzia.
Babylonian Talmud, Bava Metzia 84a.
Yep. Which, by the way, is the Masechet, is the volume of the Talmud we've been working through every Tuesday. We're actually switching now that we're online, but it's what we've been working from when we were in person. And so going at our current schedule, we should hit this page in the Talmud in like a year and a half or something. Maybe a little longer than that even. Okay, any last thoughts before next week? Okay, have a great week, everyone. Remember 5:30, let me give some plugs here. 5:30, we do Talmud every week. On Tuesday, 7 o'clock, we do University Series. There'll be one more of these. On Wednesday, Rabbi Jim is teaching his class. This Friday, I'd really encourage people, 6 o'clock, we are doing Shabbat Kulanu. If anyone was there at the first Shabbat Kulanu that was in person, right? It was all of us in concentric circles and highly, highly musical. Obviously, that's not what we're going to be doing. But Kulanu literally means all of us. So we are figuring out the technology as we speak. It's going to be all of the CRC rabbis. It's going to be old CRC friends. Ed Harris and Marty and KB we're all going to be leading Friday night services together. So 6 o'clock live stream or on the website or however you are accessing these things. The other thing is keep checking out centralreform.org/community. That is always up to date. If you want to join any of these classes, you don't need a link. You don't need to know where the Zoom is. You don't need to know anything. Just go to the website and click on the box for what you want to go to. It'll take you to where you want to go. And please, if you know of anyone who is homebound, and first of all, if they need like basic support, let us know that too. But like, not having access to the internet and technology or knowing how to use those things, that really changes life right now in particular. So if you know of people like that, we have a whole list of volunteers who want to help them. And we raised like $2,800 from people who donated so that we can buy these people computers or set up their Wi-Fi or like get them a router or whatever they need to do. So if you know of anyone who we can support, we also have a list of like 15 people who will do tech support to help them. If you know of anyone, again, go to centralreform.org/community, fill out the form, and we'll make it happen. Becky, if you know anyone in Peoria who needs that, let's talk also. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.